"Ma'am, I don't know what you're trying to catch me doing, but I didn't steal a damn thing." That was the moment Rose Monroe realized she might have gone too far. The words came from Victor, her gardener, the man she had suspected, tested, and cornered without a shred of evidence beyond skin color and silence. But let's rewind a few hours. Before the confrontation, before the shame, and before a note on a desk shifted everything she thought she knew about judgment. That morning, the sky over Austin was clear but heavy with heat. Rose, freshly showered and wrapped in a dove-gray robe, sipped her black coffee while standing in front of her open safe. Inside sat exactly what she wanted seen: $3,000 in crisp bills, a diamond-studded Cartier watch, and a folder labeled "Merger Contracts, Strictly Confidential." Her hands trembled not with fear, but with the adrenaline of someone setting a snare and waiting for a truth to reveal itself. The target? Victor Thompson. Black, early 40s, educated but quiet, hired to tend the sprawling gardens of her estate 3 weeks earlier. On paper, he was perfect. In person, he was unreadable. That made her nervous. Rose wasn't new to suspicion. As a single mother, the CEO of Monroe Tech, and a woman who had clawed her way up in a male-dominated world, trust didn't come cheap. And recently, whispers had grown around Victor's subtle, coded things. Carol from across the street had said it first. "Nice guy, but you sure he belongs around your boy?" This morning, Rose decided to find out. The security cameras were already rolling. She perched in her upstairs office, staring at a live feed of her study. Ethan, her 10-year-old son, had told Victor the kitchen door was always open for water or a bathroom break. That's all she needed, a reason for him to pass the open safe. At exactly 9:15, Victor entered through the back door. His boots tracked a faint trail of mulch along the tile floor. He passed the kitchen, heading toward the hallway. Rose held her breath. On screen, he stopped at the door of the study. The safe was in full view. He stepped inside. He looked right at it, then he bent down. Rose's fingers clenched the arms of her chair, but he didn't touch the safe. Instead, he picked up a pen, pulled a small notepad from his back pocket, scribbled something, and placed the paper on her desk. Then he walked away, calm, steady, no glances back. Rose dashed downstairs and into the study. Everything was in place, nothing missing. She picked up the note. "Safe was open. Thought you should know. Didn't touch anything. Victor." The words were neat, direct, no drama. And then came Ethan barefoot, tracking mud, holding a drawing. "Mom, Victor showed me a snake today. He said it was harmless but cool. Look." She looked down. The drawing was of a snake wrapped around a tree. Victor had written "Texas rat snake" in the corner in block letters. Ethan beamed. "He knows everything about animals." Rose swallowed hard. She hadn't just tested Victor's honesty, she'd ignored his humanity. Moments later, as if fate wanted to drive the knife in deeper, Laura showed up with a bag of gourmet coffee and an unsolicited opinion. "Ooh, is that the new guy?" she said, spotting Victor as he loaded a wheelbarrow. "Cute. Is he the plumber?" Before Rose could respond, Laura walked up to him, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and pressed it toward him. "Grab yourself a soda, sweetheart." Victor stepped back. "I'm not a plumber, and I don't take tips for breathing air." Laura blinked. "Touchy," she whispered to Rose with a tight smile. Rose said nothing. Shame doesn't always shout, it seeps. Later that day, Victor was finishing up when Ethan ran out with another drawing. "I named the snake Henry," he shouted. "Victor says Henry's probably living under the shed." Victor laughed softly, ruffled Ethan's hair, then turned to Rose. "Everything's trimmed. You want me to clean up the mulch near the porch too?" She stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. "Number, you've done more than enough." He nodded once and headed for his truck. Rose returned to the study, locked the safe slowly, and stared at the note again. Victor hadn't touched her money, but he'd touched something far more valuable, her assumptions. In the end, the test revealed a thief, not the one she'd expected. It was her, a thief of dignity, a thief of trust, and for that, there was no safe to lock it away. Victor didn't come back the next morning. Rose noticed it first by the sound, or rather, the absence of it. No low hum of the truck pulling up the driveway, no rhythmic scrape of the rake brushing the gravel. The silence made the morning coffee taste flat, and by 9:20, she found herself walking to the back porch, pretending to inspect a wilting rose bush just so she could glance down the empty road. Ethan noticed it too. "Where's Victor?" he asked as he finished his cereal, milk dribbling from the corner of his mouth. "Maybe he's just late," Rose offered, though she didn't believe it. By noon, she had called the agency. "Victor Thompson?" the woman on the other end said after a pause. "He asked to be reassigned yesterday. No reason given. Just said he was finished with the Monroe property." Rose felt something tighten in her chest, the same thing she felt when her ex-husband walked out without warning. It wasn't heartbreak, it was guilt. She could have let it go, could have respected his silence, his right to walk away, but something gnawed at her. The image of him placing that note on her desk replayed in her mind like a film loop, and the $5 bill left untouched on the railing, and the look in his eyes when he said, "I didn't steal a damn thing." So she drove to the address on the agency's file. The neighborhood was modest, low-slung houses, trimmed lawns, children riding bikes without helmets. She spotted his truck immediately. Same dents, same careful alignment to the curb. She hesitated before ringing the doorbell. He opened the door after a moment. No surprise in his eyes, no irritation either, just calm. Miss Monroe. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Anger, maybe, or indifference. What she didn't expect was how tired he looked. "I owe you an apology," she said plainly. Victor stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. The inside of his home was neat but lived in. A framed degree from UT Austin hung over a desk, stacked with garden design books and textbooks on soil chemistry. In the corner, a worn armchair sat near a small bookshelf that looked hand-built. "Wasn't necessary to come here," he said as he sat down across from her. "You already got your answer." "That's exactly why I came. Because it wasn't about the answer. It was about the question." She paused. "I assumed things I had no right to assume." Victor gave a small shrug. "You're not the first." There it was. The quiet truth, spoken without bitterness, yet heavy with wear. Rose looked at him. "I left the safe open. I watched the footage. I set you up. I figured," he said. "Didn't need the camera to feel it." Her face flushed. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Victor leaned back, studying her. "Why now?" "Because Ethan asked about you 3 times this morning. Because you were good to him. And because you were good to me. Better than I deserved." They sat in silence. Then Victor asked, "You ever wonder how many chances people like me never get? How often a door's already locked before we even knock?" Rose nodded slowly. "I do now." He looked away for a moment. Then, "I took this job to stay low. I used to work in biomedical research. Got laid off when funding shifted. Couldn't find a lab willing to hire a black guy with a quiet voice and a last name they don't trust. So I started landscaping. At least with plants, nobody asks if you belong." Rose's chest ached with the weight of what she'd failed to see. "I'd like to hire you back," she said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "To test me again?" "No," she said, voice steady. "To trust you this time." He gave a soft chuckle, not out of amusement but disbelief. "Why would I say yes?" "Because Ethan misses you, and because maybe you'd like to teach him more than just trees, maybe science, maybe honor." Victor didn't answer right away, but something shifted in his posture, less guarded, more curious. "I'll think about it," he said finally. The next day, his truck was back in the driveway. Ethan ran out like it was Christmas morning. "Victor, did you know cicadas live underground for years? I read it." Victor smiled. "I do, but I bet you don't know why." Rose watched from the kitchen window, her heart settling in a way it hadn't in years. Later that week, Monroe Tech hosted a community brunch at the estate, an annual event to show goodwill, boost public image before the IPO. The lawn was packed with local business leaders, board members, and family friends. Rose wore a cream suit and smiled through dozens of shallow conversations. Victor was working quietly along the east hedge when one of the guests, a gray-haired investor from Chicago, waved him over. "You the help?" the man asked, sipping champagne. "Mind grabbing us more chairs?" Victor didn't flinch. "I'm the landscape specialist," he replied. "You'll find chairs inside." The man blinked, clearly caught off guard by the calm defiance. Rose saw it unfold and walked over. "Victor," she said, "can you join us for lunch when you're finished?" The investor looked confused. He's a friend," Rose cut in smoothly, "and someone I trust." As they walked away, Victor murmured, "That's new." She looked at him. It's overdue. Trust, she was learning, wasn't about locks and safes. It was about how you treated people when no one was looking and how you owned it when you failed. The first sign that something wasn't right came in the form of a voicemail. Rose returned from the boardroom meeting later that week, heels clicking down the marble hallway of Monroe Tech, when she noticed the blinking red light on her office phone. Pressing play, she heard the voice of Officer Blake, steady but heavy. "Miss Monroe, this is Officer Blake from the Westlake Hills Police Department. I'd like to speak with you regarding an incident that occurred on your property involving one of your contracted workers. Please call me back as soon as possible." Her stomach dropped. It took less than a minute to dial him. "Yes, this is Rose Monroe returning your call." "Thank you, Miss Monroe. We received a report from one of your neighbors, Carol Jensen. She claims she witnessed your gardener, Mr. Victor Thompson, behaving suspiciously around your garage 2 nights ago." Rose nearly laughed. "Suspicious how?" "She alleges he was attempting to access the keypad entry, says he was lingering and looking over his shoulder. And he was probably fixing the floodlight," Rose snapped. "I asked him to check it, it's been flickering." There was a pause on the line. "We'd still like to ask him a few questions." Her jaw tightened. "Victor is not a criminal. He's a veteran, a biologist, a man who tutors my son in science. I assure you, officer, this is a misunderstanding." Another pause. "We'll follow up either way." When she hung up, she stared at the phone like it had betrayed her. Then she walked out to her car, slammed the door harder than necessary, and drove straight home. Victor was in the backyard, bent over a flower bed, gloves on, humming softly to himself. Ethan sat cross-legged nearby, sketching something in a notebook. "Victor," Rose called out, trying to keep her voice even. He stood. "Everything all right? I need to ask you something." She approached him, lowering her voice so Ethan wouldn't hear. "Did you fix the garage light Tuesday night?" He blinked. "Yeah. You said the sensor was off, remember? I came back around 9. Didn't want to bother you, so I parked by the curb and used my own ladder." "Carol called the police," she said, eyes flashing. Victor didn't flinch. "Of course she did. She said you were trying to get into the house." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd known all along. "There's always someone watching," he murmured. "I told them it was a mistake, but they want to talk to you." He shrugged. "Let them." "Victor," she said gently, "I'm sorry." He met her gaze. "It's not your fault Carol sees what she wants to see, but it was, in part, because Rose had once seen the same thing. That night, they were both proven right. Victor called her at 10:42 p.m. His voice was tense. "They stopped me on the way home, cuffed me, made me sit on the sidewalk while they searched my truck, said someone claimed I was casing houses in the neighborhood." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. "Where are you now?" "Back home. They let me go. No charges. But they left a nice little dent in my driver's side door. I'm so sorry, Victor. I'll call Officer Blake." "Don't," he said. "Not yet. But I don't want you fighting for me. Not like this. Let me handle it." She hesitated. "All right. But I want you to know you're not alone in this." The next morning, Monroe Tech buzzed with nervous energy. The community brunch had been featured in the local paper, and Rose's photo smiling beside Victor made the front page. Board members started murmuring. Investors wanted reassurances. And then, the sabotage. That afternoon, someone posted edited security footage from Rose's home on social media. It showed Victor walking into her study and standing near the open safe, but cut out the part where he left the note and walked away. The post was titled, "Millionaire CEO caught employing ex, con to work in her mansion. Is her son safe?" Within hours, it went viral. Rose sat frozen in her office, watching the video loop again and again, rage rising in her throat. "Who leaked this?" she demanded of her assistant. "We don't know," the woman whispered. "But it came from inside." Rose stood. "Call it. I want every access log from our cloud database. And get me Officer Blake, now." By evening, her home was surrounded by news vans. Ethan was terrified. Victor never came by. She didn't sleep. The next morning she stood on her porch, hair tied back, face bare, and addressed the cameras. "My name is Rose Monroe," she began, voice steady. "I am the CEO of Monroe Tech, and I am the mother of a 10-year-old boy who believes people should be judged by their actions, not their skin." She held up the full, unedited security footage. "This is the truth. The man in that video is Victor Thompson. He is a U.S. Army veteran. He is a scientist. He is my gardener, and he is my friend." She paused. 3 weeks ago, I doubted him. I tested him. I betrayed the very values I built my company on, and he still showed my son kindness." She glanced at the reporters, their lenses fixed on her. "I won't let anyone else twist this story into a weapon. Not against him, not against me. If you want scandal, look elsewhere. If you want justice, watch the tape." "Oh." Then she walked back inside, closed the door, and held Ethan close. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, she knew exactly which side she was on, and she wasn't leaving it. Victor's smile faded first thing the morning after the live stream controversy. He woke to find his mother's favorite chair in the living room empty. The framed diploma from UT Austin shifted slightly, as if something in the air had changed overnight. She waited on her couch, looking frail and pale. He offered a cup of tea and sat down slowly, clasping his mother's hand. "They didn't press charges," he said quietly. She nodded without looking up. He had told her about Carol's call, the video post, the local reporters parked outside his mother's house. Now, trying to comfort him felt like trying to hold water in your hands. Later, at Rose's invitation, he returned to the Monroe estate to pick up his tools. The gates stood open. There was no welcome committee, just a thin note slipped under the front door. "Come by whenever you feel ready." Inside, the grass grew tall in patches, a silent accusation about absence and maintenance. He found the silver watering can, one of his favorites, on the porch. He picked it up tentatively and noticed that Ethan had hung a drawing on the mailbox, a stick figure labeled, "Victor Friend." He paused, chest tight. Rose found him by the camellia bush, wiping moisture from her eyes as she knelt. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything," she whispered. Victor nodded and resumed his work. She didn't try to talk him into staying, not yet. She just stood behind him, offering silent forgiveness. That evening, over phone calls with staff, Rose informed Dr. Miriam Jones, the pediatrician and community activist, about the false accusations and viral post. Miriam's voice crackled with controlled fury. "This is about more than rumors. This is systemic," she said. They hatched a plan to bring the unedited footage to city council and local press, alongside witness statements from neighbors who rejected Carol's insinuations. Meanwhile, Victor sat in his small living room at home. The walls held photos of awards and recognitions he'd earned as a research assistant public health grant, academic citations all offset by the hollow ache of forfeited possibilities. He remembered the day a lab director ushered him into his office saying, "We're downsizing. It's nothing personal." Within days, he was escorted off the premises. No explanation. He was black, single, articulate, but in rooms full of doubt. That became enough. He scruffed through old emails and packets of old lab research, hopeful to reconcile the past. It was his mother who finally spoke. "They saw a name. They saw a face. They didn't ask you once." He reached for her hand, and between them grew a sturdiness, forged not in innocence, but in survival. Meanwhile, Rose prepared for a public town hall meeting organized by Dr. Jones. She practiced her statement until the words didn't choke her. She planned to show the footage, present Victor's cleanliness of character, and call out prejudice quietly but firmly. She knew Carol would be there. Officer Blake might testify. The estate's hedge-lined lawns provided the setting, symbol for growth and enclosure. On the day of the meeting, the community center was packed with locals, reporters, and even antivirus protesters stirring claims of security concerns. Rose stepped to the lectern in a fitted blazer, Ethan at her side clutching his drawing. She began softly. "I once tested a man I barely knew because I feared an outcome that never happened." Her voice steadied. She presented the footage in full, the note, Ethan's drawings, and Victor's calm dignity. She invited Miriam to speak and gave Victor the floor. He described his dismissal from the lab, the incident of being stopped by police at dusk near his mother's house while walking to his car, a routine check, he'd been told. He spoke without anger, just clarity. "I'm not asking for pity, just fairness." At the back of the room, Carol shifted in her seat. Her stare dropped. Miriam asked Carol if she'd reconsider her assumptions. Carol choked out, I was wrong. A few neighboring homeowners nodded in agreement. After the meeting, eyes turned to Victor. A young black girl approached, wide-eyed. "You're brave," she said. Another neighbor handed him a plate of lemon squares. Rose squeezed his shoulder, tears brimming. Ethan licked the icing off his thumb happily, unaware of the unlearning his mother and communities were writing into the day. That night, Victor returned home to find his mother in the kitchen with fresh-baked bread. He held her hand and said softly, "Mère, morthu on honroy." She smiled, closing her eyes. For once, he believed her. Rose, upstairs, unpacked the events in her journal. She wrote, "Justice doesn't need to roar to be heard. It grows quietly seeded by vulnerability and watered with humility." She paused and added one more line. "We will keep growing." Aye, and in that small house, in that community, the healing took root deep, slow, and lasting. The dawn was robed in gray when Rose Monroe woke, the silence in her home heavier than it had been in weeks. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt the steady beat of her heart, reminding her she was still alive, still responsible. Today mattered not for a merger or press release, but for the foundations of dignity she'd almost broken. By mid-morning, she sat across from Dr. Miriam Jones in a quiet conference room at the community clinic, papers and social media printouts spread across the table. Miriam's tone was firm as she leaned forward. "Rose, we're not just cleaning up after a smear. We're turning this into a lesson about implicit bias and leadership." Rose nodded, fingers tracing the note Victor had written months ago. "Let's prepare to take this story wider beyond Westlake Hills." Meanwhile, Victor returned to the estate to tidy up the garden. The early light found him pruning lavender in the east bed, the scent mingling with warm earth and the distant hum of lawnmowers in neighboring yards. He worked quietly, deliberately, respectful of the trust that had been so publicly broken and tentatively mended. As noon approached, Rose walked the curved pathway toward him carrying 2 iced teas. She handed one over and spoke without preamble. "I've decided to invite you back officially as the Director of Ecological Design. It's not a fallback, I want you in that role." Victor accepted the tea and let it rest in his gloved hand. He watched her, expression unreadable. "I'll think about it," he said. "But if I do, I'll only do it if I'm building something real, not just hedgerows and mulch." She smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I want you to build with us." In the afternoon, Carol Jensen appeared by the fence, lawn bags in hand. Her posture stiff, she offered a tentative greeting. Without prompting, Rose introduced Victor. "Carol, this is Victor Thompson, my colleague and friend." Carol's eyes flickered, guilt sparking where suspicion had once lived. She swallowed. "Victor, I owe you an apology." Victor nodded. "Thank you," he said. He didn't embrace it. He didn't need to. Ethan skipped up with a tablet in hand. Images filled the screen, diagrams of native pollinators, sketch plans for a vegetable patch, and labels in Victor's neat printing. "Look what Victor showed me how bees work in an eco-friendly garden." He looked at Rose. "Can you help us start planting next week?" Rose squeezed Victor's shoulder. He nodded. That weekend, Monroe Tech held its charity fundraiser in the garden. Lanterns hung from oak branches, a soft breeze stirred white tents, and neighbors mingled with donors under the setting sun. Rose walked to the stage before the small crowd and introduced Victor with pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, I never planned to hire a gardener. I planned to hire honesty, curiosity, and a teacher for my son. He is our Director of Ecological Design. Please meet Victor Thompson." Polite applause broke, growing sincere as Victor stepped forward. He shared a few words about sustainable landscaping, then paused. "Plants grow best when they're nurtured respectfully. People do too." The crowd nodded. A young mother wiped tears. Ethan stood by his side, clutching the drawing he'd made months ago. After the talk, Carol approached Victor and pressed out a plate of cookies. "I was wrong about everything," she said quietly. Victor smiled and took her hand. "We all learn," he said. Nearby, staff members and guests complimented the gardens, calling them more than landscaping. They said they felt like a place designed with purpose. That night, Rose and Victor stayed late, he finishing planting native wildflowers under the spruce trees, she sweeping the patio beside him. Ethan slept already. The estate lights glowed softly. Rose paused and watched his silhouette against the garden beds. "Thank you," she said empty-handed. Victor simply nodded. "Just keep letting me grow." And, in the following mornings, the garden flourished, and so did his small team. Rose allowed him to hire 2 interns from the local university, both studying environmental science. They worked side by side, weeding, sketching, caring. A month later, at a city sustainability awards ceremony held under a banner reading, "Green Community Award," Rose accepted the trophy alongside Victor. She squeezed his arm. The plaque read, "Presented to Monroe Tech and Victor Thompson for exemplary green leadership and community stewardship." Back home, Rose placed the award on a shelf next to Ethan's drawing of Victor's tree, labeled, "My Hero." She read her journal entry from weeks earlier, "Justice grows quietly," and below it added, "If you're willing to water it patiently." Victor glanced at the drawing and the plaque, then at her. He nodded a silent gesture of recognition and turned back to water the new wildflower patch. The community knew now, justice wasn't vindication. It was rebuilding with honor and crafting a garden of inclusion that could inspire beyond the walls of any safe. Victor woke to thunder rolling across Austin in the early hours, rain drumming against his bedroom window, with an insistence that made the air thick and restless. He dressed quickly in jeans and a worn jacket, stepping outside to check on his tools. They were drenched, scattered across the lawn. The storm had erupted without warning. At the estate, Rose had already heard Ethan crying for someone in the dark. She found him barefoot, soaked, standing at the base of the large oak treehouse they'd built last summer. "I heard a bird, Mama. I tried to save it, but then I got stuck." His voice trembled. Lightning forked overhead as Rose wrapped a blanket around him and ran indoors. Meanwhile, Victor grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the estate, pushing through sheets of rain. He found Ethan perched on a branch, tears tracking down his face, surrounded by twigs and rain-soaked leaves. Rose stood on the ground, drenched herself, voice catching, "Ethan, honey, just hold on." Victor climbed nimbly, lifted Ethan into his arms, and carried him down the slippery ladder to safety. Rose fell forward, wrapping her arms around them both. She looked up at Victor, at the way his jacket dripped rain into the soft grass, at the worry in his eyes for her son. She realized then that there were loyalties deeper than contracts, braver than gratitude, and a strength born from kindness, not suspicion. They made their way back into the house, drenched and trembling. Inside, the fireplace crackled with warmth for the first time in hours. Victor held Ethan in one arm, draping the blanket over him, whispering calm words. Rose sat beside them, wrapping her other arm around Ethan's shoulders, the weight of what she had nearly lost crashing into her throat. No one spoke for a long moment. Lightning splintered outside. Rose could feel guilt, fear, and relief colliding inside her. Ethan mewed like a frightened kitten beneath the blanket. Victor said nothing until Ethan whispered, "Thank you, Victor. You saved me." Victor's voice was soft. "Just call me if you need help another time." Rose cleared her throat, voice unsteady. "Victor, But the words didn't come. She simply shook her head, tears filling her eyes. He nodded, turned away to gather his soggy tools, and prepared to leave the estate grounds. But she followed him to the back porch, water dripping from his gloves. She put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay, have some tea. Let me make sure Ethan's okay." He hesitated, then nodded. They went inside together. Later, in the kitchen, they drank hot tea, steam rising between them. Ethan curled up on the couch with a towel around his shoulders and a coloring book in hand. Rose looked at Victor, noticing for the first time the curve of scars on his knuckles, old gardening injuries. She guessed, but each line seemed to tell a story she hadn't yet asked. "You know," she began gently, "you saved more than my son today." Victor looked up, startled. "I just did what anyone would fetch help, bring him down." "Not anyone," she said. "Ethan told me he thought he heard a bird. I thought he was just upset, but then he trusted you, and you didn't hesitate." Victor nodded, looking into his cup. After a beat, he said quietly, "Sometimes you do things because you don't want regret more than fear." Rose pressed her lips together, absorbing the weight of the confession. She realized the division between them, race, class, roles in her life, had dissolved in that moment. What remained was just human. By evening, the rain lightened and thunder faded. Victor packed his tools with unhurried calm. Ethan approached him, holding a sloppily sketched bird picture. It's the one that got scared. I couldn't save it, but I drew how it looked. Thank you for trying." Victor took the picture gently. "That's beautiful," he said. "Maybe we can learn more about birds together." End of 4. Ethan's face brightened. Rose watched from behind the kitchen door, feeling something break inside her, not guilt this time, but understanding. Just as Victor headed toward the gate, Rose called out, "Victor, wait." He paused. "Would you like to design a rain garden? Some of these patches are washed out badly." He nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." Victor returned to the yard in the golden late afternoon light. He knelt in the muddy bed and began replanting wildflowers and rain-tolerant grasses. Rose joined him, handing out small plant bundles. Ethan kneeled beside Victor, helping press soil around the roots. Their hands, 3 hands of different colors, worked together in the mud. As dusk fell and lanterns flickered on the porch, Rose stood back and watched the 3 of them, Victor, Ethan, and herself, creating something fragile and precious from the storm. In that soil, she realized, the deeper roots of trust could finally grow. Late that night, Rose cleaned the study and retrieved the note Victor had written before. She placed it beside Ethan's bird picture on the desk and added a new note. "You taught a boy courage today. Thank you." She folded it carefully. Victor never saw it, but he didn't have to. She meant every word. Outside, the garden glistened under lampposts. The rain had washed away the fear. The bird might still be gone, but from the heart of every living thing in that estate, something new had taken flight. Rose didn't expect the next visit from the board to feel so tense, but it did. She waited in the foyer, rehearsing how to stay poised. That afternoon, investors arrived at her estate for a walkthrough before finalizing the IPO. She greeted them with a calm smile, while inside notes she had written swirled in her head like wildfire. When they asked about the gardens, she introduced Victor Thompson by name and title, Director of Ecological Design. A hush fell, some eyebrows raised at him being black, some surprised at his role, but Rose held strong. They moved through the property, admiring the native plantings and rain garden Victor had designed. Rose watched as one investor murmured about not expecting the gardener to be so knowledgeable. Victor, with quiet dignity, answered questions about soil composition and sustainability, illustrating how the landscape now functioned as a living classroom for Ethan. She saw suspicion turn into respect in that crowd. That evening, Rose sat at her desk with Dr. Miriam Jones across from her. She looked tired but determined. "People still talk," she said. "Our community brunch was good, but underneath the polite smiles, the assumptions haven't vanished." Miriam nodded as she reviewed feedback from neighbors, a mix of support and quiet resistance. "We need to turn this into an ally-building mission," Miriam suggested. "Focus on trust, biology, education, start a workshop series." The following weekend, Rose invited Victor and Ethan to help with the first public workshop, Gardening and Ecology for Families. They set up tables under the oak tree by the driveway, jars of soil samples, plant seedlings, and laminated index cards with insect facts. Rose welcomed attendees, local families, curious reporters, and a few skeptical board members hoping to watch the gardener fail. Victor led the session calmly, showing kids how pollinators wore pollen-like makeup and why native species mattered. Ethan helped label plants and passed out crayons for drawing caterpillars. The crowd laughed, learned, and warmed to them both. After the workshop, Carol approached Victor quietly. "I attended because I wanted to see, and I learned something," she admitted. Victor nodded. "Thank you." Rose joined them. "Your apology was brave. This is progress," she said. Carol hesitated. "I'd also like to help, maybe volunteer in the garden sometimes." Rose smiled with relief and gratitude. Inside later, Rose looked at Victor. He was gathering tools. "I'm doing this part-time," he reminded her. She paused, then said, "I want to offer you a full-time position, not just design oversight, hire interns, connect with schools." Victor set his tool down, taken aback. "That's a serious offer," he said. She nodded. "I want to trust your leadership in more than plants." Victor exhaled, as if exhaling a half-edged blade he'd held for years. "I'd like that, but only if it's built on respect and honest work." She extended her hand. He shook it firmly. Weeks passed, and the garden buzzed with life bees, blossoms, and community volunteers. Ethan's bedtime routine changed. Now he told Rose daily about a bug, a flower, or something Victor taught him. That night, he fell asleep to the sound of crickets in the yard. Rose walked outside in the moonlight and saw Victor sketching the layout of a butterfly garden. She reminded him, "Don't forget the milkweed patch." He looked up and smiled. "Already drawn it in." At the end of the month, Rose announced an internship program with the local college for underrepresented students studying environmental science. She publicly credited Victor as co-founder. Local news covered the launch with a feature titled, "Gardener Becomes Teacher, a Lesson in Trust and Ecology." Rose watched the interview by her desk, camera panned to Victor kneeling in the garden, adjusting plants, the sunlight catching sweat on his brow. She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with healing. Her journal entry that night read, "Leadership is not about isolation, it's about planting seeds for others to grow." Today, Victor grew in front of everyone. She closed it, leaned back in her chair, and thought about how far she'd come from that first morning, safe, open, eyes full of suspicion. She stood. Tomorrow, she knew, they'd plant the butterfly garden together. Victor nodded when she told him, "Let's give Ethan a place to see change happen." Under his breath he murmured, "Let's grow something that lasts." No one saw them working in the fading light except the oak tree and the frogs gathering by the new rain pool. In that silence, Rose understood again. Trust doesn't begin with a test, it begins with conviction, shared roots, and time. The morning air felt crisp, golden, and full of possibility when Ethan marched into Rose's study, excited. "Mom, Victor, look what I made," he announced, placing a detailed drawing on her desk, a sprawling map of the garden, each flower bed labeled with names and insect species he'd learned. At the top, in bright crayon, were the words, "My hero Victor." Rose studied it, tears gathering, and glanced at the note she had placed there days ago. "You taught a boy courage today. Thank you." She looked at Victor, who stood quietly behind Ethan, shoulders steady. In that moment, she knew this chapter of their relationship would shape more than a garden. She cleared her throat. "Ethan did this last night," she said. Victor knelt to take the map and smiled at her son. Ethan beamed. "We're going to plant everything on here, right?" he asked. Victor nodded slowly, examining the map. Bright dots for milkweed near the butterfly garden, rows of native grasses by the oak, and a pollinator patch on the eastern slope. "Exactly," he said. "And you'll help plant tomorrow." Rose motioned toward the map. Victor was talking about expanding the garden for community workshops, and that might become our internship curriculum. Victor shifted slightly, surprised and thoughtful. She continued, "I want you to co-lead it. Curriculum, planting schedule, even guest lectures." Victor blinked. "That's a big leap." She smiled. "You're ready." "Oh." That afternoon, after Ethan's nap, Rose and Victor walked the grounds together, discussing where the butterfly garden should go. Butterflies, he explained, needed nectar-rich plants up front and hiding places deeper in. She asked questions. He answered patiently, and Ethan trailed behind, collecting caterpillar shells. Rose felt a swell of pride, not just for the garden, but for the community and values they were cultivating. By evening, Ethan helped Victor plant the first seedlings in the butterfly bed. Rose sat on the porch steps, watching shadows lengthen. She thought about everything that had happened from that open safe to today's planting. She realized she had nearly lost more than trust. She nearly lost an opportunity to learn what real leadership looked like. Over dinner, Rose unexpectedly brought up the internship program. She described how local colleges had sent inquiries, how Turner High's science club wanted to collaborate. Victor listened, and when she finished, he quietly asked, "Ethan, wants to?" Rose nodded. Victor glanced at her, reading her answer. He turned to Ethan. "That's great, buddy." Ethan's eyes were bright. That night, Rose lay awake next to Ethan's empty bed, lingering on the map and the day's planting. She opened her journal and wrote, "He didn't need to reclaim trust. He needed a place to grow. And so did I." She closed it and allowed sleep to come. The next morning, Carol Jensen knocked on the front door. Rose greeted her, surprised but calm. Carol looked at the garden, then at Victor weeding nearby. She cleared her throat. "I was thinking, would you like some help with the butterfly garden? I know I asked before, and I wasn't sincere." "But I'd like to learn Yule's plan." Rose's voice caught slightly, but she nodded. Victor smiled. "We'd be honored." And over the next hour, Victor walked Carol through pollinator zones, showing how plants and insects interacted. Ethan perched at Victor's side, asking shy questions. Carol listened, nodded, and seemed to transform before Rose's eyes from someone who, to whispered warnings to someone who wanted to learn. That evening, Rose met with Dr. Miriam Jones. The community workshops had gained traction. Schools wanted field trips, families wanted weekend tours. Miriam suggested a solid plan. Trust becomes legacy when it's shared. They drafted a schedule, including a day of seeds for city youth, and invited local media to cover the first planting event. Rose approved it with relief. The garden was no longer just Rose's or Victor's. It belonged to everyone. On planting day, parents and children gathered under tent canopies, maps in hand, gloves on. Victor led a demonstration, showing how to plant milkweed and explaining the monarch life cycle. Ethan assisted by handing out saplings. Rose introduced the project publicly. "We're not just growing flowers, we're growing understanding, compassion, and shared effort." The applause was warm and genuine. After planting, a woman approached Rose with a small card. She'd written, "Thank you for showing my children that respect crosses skin color." Rose looked up and Perry's grandmother pointed at Victor, who was teaching a group of kids. Rose returned his gaze and nodded, mouth full of pride. That evening, with tools cleaned and the garden glimmering in lantern light, Rose found Victor kneeling in the pollinator bed. He looked up. She handed him a glass jar with lavender sprigs. "For you," she said, "to keep." He accepted it. She paused, hesitated. "Would you join me on stage at the Community Awards next month?" He looked surprised. "You started something real here. I'd like the world to see it." He nodded. "I'll do it." And Ethan ran up from his room with the original drawing and threw his arms around Victor's leg. "I want to help too." Victor ruffled his hair. Rose watched them, teacher, student, and mother intertwined in one shared purpose. That night, Rose added one more line to her journal. "A garden without growth is just land, but a garden with shared roots becomes community." She turned off the desk lamp and hummed softly, watching Victor water newly planted butterflies' habitat under the moonlight. In those petals and leaves, she understood once more, redemption isn't a trophy, it's soil and sunlight and time. And in that soil lay the deepest seeds of all. The crisp spring morning was electric when Rose Monroe stepped onto the veranda and looked across her transformed garden. Everything had changed: organized pollinator beds, a growing butterfly garden, and, most visibly, Victor Thompson standing by the new sunflower border, greeting early volunteers with warmth she once never imagined he'd receive here. Today was the third Black neighborhood complaint test, this time from a guest, claiming she saw Victor lurking near her garage. Rose's heart pounded with recognition of the pattern, but this time she was ready. A quiet click sounded behind her as Victor joined her. "Something wrong?" he asked softly. She handed him a printed email, another false accusation. She met his gaze. "I already told them once," he whispered. She took his arm. "This time, I'm stepping forward first." They walked to the front porch together. Rose dialed Officer Blake as the party guests began to arrive for Monroe Tech's annual garden gala, held that evening as a charity fundraiser. When he answered, she spoke firmly. "Officer Blake, this is Rose Monroe. We've received another false report about Victor. I want to make a statement. I'd appreciate if you could escort me and Victor as witnesses to the caller." She paused, letting the silence press. "Or I can meet you at the station with my press liaison. But we won't ignore this one." The line went quiet. Then, "Understood, Miss Monroe." Guests began arriving: board members, investors, family friends, and neighbors. An undercurrent of curiosity rippled through the crowd, given Victor's growing visibility. Rose opened the gala formally, introducing Victor as Director of Ecological Design and sharing how the garden initiative had grown from an experiment into a community program, co-led by Victor. Applause broke out, genuine and buoyant. The evening light softened the air and the gold lanterns scattered across the lawn glowed. Volunteer families strolled between booths, showing native plants, children sketching insects, and tables of brochures describing internship opportunities. Victor quietly guided a group through the eco-sustainability booth when Officer Blake appeared at his side. Rose excused herself and joined them. He offered a calm nod and escorted them to a quiet corner near the water feature, where the garden's rain pool hummed softly. The officer spoke plainly. "We received the call from a neighbor accusing Mr. Thompson of trespassing." Rose interjected, her tone unwavering. "I'm here to correct the record. Victor is an invited guest on this property every single day. We're celebrating his role tonight." She handed the officer a photo booklet chronicling the garden's progress and images of Victor working with interns and children. He flipped through slowly, nodded, then looked to Victor. "You're clear, sir." "Aye." Relief washed over Victor's face in the glow of firefly lanterns. Rose offered him a small smile. Then she turned to face the fading crowd of guests, drawn by the conversation, and quietly announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge Officer Blake, who's confirmed once more that Mr. Thompson is welcomed and respected on this estate at all times." Applause rose again, this time steely and clear. Victor stepped forward, looked around at the garden, at families, at children filing glow in the dark seed packets, and said simply, "Thank you for trusting what we've built here." Later, the sun dipped low as guests mingled near a slate stage where Rose again took the mic. She called Victor to join her. "Our final surprise this evening," she said, "honoring someone who taught us that community is built when trust is extended and fear is released." She handed Victor a framed certificate, recognizing his work, and offered the same to Dr. Miriam Jones, who had spoken earlier about community resilience. Victor nodded, accepting it from her hands. The audience rose in a slow standing ovation, parents, board members, neighbors who had once whispered doubt. As the gala wound down, Rose and Victor walked the winding garden path toward the oak tree house where lantern light shimmered. Ethan ran ahead, showing Victor the first monarch butterfly settling on a milkweed bloom. Rose watched, her gaze soft. Victor's face relaxed, full in the glow. She took his hand, tender but firm. "Thank you," she murmured. "For staying, for showing up." He squeezed her hand gently. "For giving me a garden worth staying for." Before they parted that night, Rose pulled a slender envelope from her purse, handing it to Victor. Inside was a letter of employment, title fully outlined, with salary, benefits, and a clause for him to invite interns to teach community classes in the garden pavilion. His eyes lifted to hers, and he nodded acceptance, solidarity, and renewed purpose all wrapped in one gesture. That night, Rose stood alone in the garden where the gala had ended. Lanterns flickered, and the night air still hummed with music memories. She wrote in her journal beneath the oak tree, "Real justice isn't mercy. It's equal space." And Victor just claimed it not quietly this time, but celebrated. She closed the book and looked at the garden one last time. Trust had been planted, storms weathered, injustice confronted, and community emerged. And out there, under the lantern-lit silence, that garden of resilience and redemption stood. The next morning dawned with clarity, the garden's colors sharper than the day before, sunflowers golden, lavender regal, and Victor's new butterfly habitat humming with life. Rose Monroe walked along the east hedge where the pollinator beds glowed under dew, and Victor followed beside her, handing her a freshly printed visitor's log for the garden pavilion. As the director of ecological design, he'd added a time-stamped entry, "First community visitor, Mrs. Alvarez's third graders. We planted milkweed." The two of them paused, one surveying roots and insects, the other offering a hand steady with purpose. Rose felt pride swell, tinged with something deeper, that moment when trust had finally been earned and extended. By mid-morning, Rose's assistant brought a call from the Monroe Tech headquarters. Investors were calling again, but this time seeking agreements to include Victor's green initiatives in the company's public sustainability goals. She ended the call with a smile anchored in relief and vision. Victor had grown from liability to legacy. Rose looked at him and spoke. "I want you on the Leadership Council monthly strategy meetings. Your voice matters now." His surprise softened into something like belonging. He nodded. They walked through the pavilion where interns had already begun sketching designs for next week's workshop. Ethan peeked out from behind a table, painting a caterpillar. Rose watched him quietly, then placed her hand gently on Victor's shoulder. "He learns best with you," she whispered. "He respects you." He nodded, glancing at Ethan's painting, and smiled quietly. Later, Dr. Miriam Jones arrived to tour the expanded butterfly garden. She observed the meticulous placement of nectar plants, the rain pool ecosystem, and the young interns planting wildflowers. Miriam praised the collaborative spirit. "You built more than gardens, this feels like shared purpose." She and Rose spoke of scaling the model, partnering with local schools and city council to replicate the garden project in underserved neighborhoods. Victor contributed quietly, giving soil samples and plant science insights that anchored the program. By afternoon, the neighborhood was abuzz. A local journalist visited to film the garden for a Sunday feature, focusing on the story of Rose and Victor's unlikely partnership. Rose escorted him through the garden, then invited Victor center stage. He explained the sustainable design, the internship outreach, and in closing said, "Trust began with a test, but it ends with intentional care." That tagline would open the television segment and echo through post-feature interviews on community gardens across Austin. At twilight, as staff packed up for the evening, Rose and Victor shared a quiet moment near the oak tree house. Ethan appeared, sleepy-eyed and clutching the original My Hero Victor drawing. He climbed into Rose's arms. She turned to Victor. He fell asleep talking about ants and bees and how to keep a butterfly alive. Victor sat beside Ethan, gently brushing his hair. "He's curious," he said simply. "That's a gift." Rose nodded, feeling grateful warmth in her chest. She turned to Victor. "I meant it. I want you to speak at the State Sustainability Summit next month. With me." He paused, thoughtful. "That would mean a lot to show this model can work beyond my corner of the world." She offered him the official speaker invite via email on her phone. He accepted. The next day, Rose prepared her remarks at home, while Ethan played in the garden with his drawing taped to the mailbox. She phrased it clearly. Planting doesn't just alter landscapes, it titles who belongs on them. She practiced with internal conviction, not for investors now, but for young black students logging into live streams or journaling in sister gardens across Texas. At dusk, Rose took a last walk through the garden alone. She paused by the butterfly garden, watching monarchs rest briefly on blossoms. She whispered to herself, "We did that beauty, progress, justice." She retrieved the note Victor had placed on her desk at the beginning. Safe was open, didn't touch a thing. She carried it to the butterfly bed and placed it gently against a cluster of lavender. She wrote on a new note, "You trusted courage, and it bloomed." She slipped it behind a slate marker, to be discovered someday by a child's hand. Rose returned home, opened her journal, and wrote, "From test to trust, from fear to fellowship. May the roots we planted here reach farther than any safe or wall ever could." She closed the leather cover and turned off the lamp. Outside, the garden glistened under soft garden lights. In the hush, she heard the quiet hum of pollinators, a gentle affirmation. The connection between them had grown deeper, wider, and the garden had become a home where justice took bloom. The gala's sun-soaked afternoon faded into lantern-lit evening when Rose Monroe stood at the simple wooden podium on the lawn, smiling at the guests gathered among the wildflowers and humming pollinator stations. She introduced Victor Thompson, now unmistakably the heart of this living project, as Director of Ecological Design. Her voice was firm, proud. "I never set out to hire a gardener. I set out to hire integrity." Applause rippled through the audience. Neighbors who once whispered doubts gave genuine respect now. Victor stepped up beside her, clearing his throat. Under the oak treehouse canopy, he spoke softly into the mic. "When I first started here, I thought silence might shield me. But silence can't hold truth. I'm here today not because I passed a test. I'm here because this community chose to grow with me." As he spoke, families and board members listened quietly, eyes glistening. Later, at the community brunch on the following Sunday, Rose watched Victor lead children through the garden's educational marquee. He showed them how milkweed and butterfly habitats worked, explained water filtering in the rain garden he designed. Ethan followed him like a shadow, offering saplings to help plant. Among the crowd, Carol Jensen watched quietly. When the group dispersed, she approached Victor hesitant but firm. "Victor," she said softly, tilting her head, "I was wrong before. I see now how much wrong I did to assume." He nodded and said, "Thank you." Rose stood a few steps away, feeling a swell of relief. In the afternoon, Dr. Miriam Jones invited them to a sit-down beneath the oak for planning upcoming workshops. Miriam's calm energy brought clarity. They sketched ideas for bringing the garden model to local schools, hospitals, and underserved urban plots. They drafted letters of intent, drafted lesson plans to teach soil chemistry, native ecology, and the values of community gardening. Victor demonstrated how to explain photosynthesis to a third grader using local wildflowers. That evening, Rose and Victor sat together on the patio swing. Lanterns filtered the night air. Ethan slept indoors. Victor pulled from his pocket a small packet of monarch butterfly eggs collected earlier that day from the milkweed. "I've been studying them," he said. "We can raise them in the greenhouse to guarantee a next generation." Rose nodded, absorbing the detail not just of his work, but of his thoughtfulness. She surprised herself by saying, "I want to give you full control of that greenhouse project. Label it in your name." He paused, heartfelt. "Thank you." The next morning, Rose called a staff meeting. Interns, staffers, and outreach volunteers sat in the pavilion. She introduced Victor as the official greenhouse manager. She turned to him. "You'll lead the summer seed to butterfly program. I trust your vision." He accepted with quiet confidence, his pulse steady. Later that day, a local reporter pulled Rose aside during a garden tour. He asked, "What's next for you and Victor?" She smiled and said, "We're planting equity. Beauty isn't enough, it needs partnership, active hands, sharing knowledge." The reporter nodded thoughtfully. By late afternoon, Victor and the interns had gathered for a first greenhouse meeting. He laid out containers, host plants, caterpillar care guides. Ethan joined with crayon drawings of butterfly life cycles taped to the wall. Rose watched from the doorway, heart full. That night, Rose wrote in her journal by the study window, "We've moved beyond test and apology. Now we build legacy together." She placed the note he had written months ago next to Ethan's sketch of the butterfly garden. Outside in the garden beds, the night insects hummed their lullaby. Weeks later, at a statewide ecological sustainability summit, Rose and Victor shared the stage under rolling banners and microphones. Rose introduced him. "This is a man who taught our city a hard lesson that trust must be earned, yes, but also offered freely when deserved." Victor spoke in measured cadence. "I stand here not as a gardener judged, but as a neighbor affirmed." The room erupted in respectful applause, standing. Back home that night, Rose and Victor returned to the garden together now, quiet but illuminated by soft solar lights. Ethan sat by the butterfly bed, carefully tending a chrysalis with a small paintbrush. Rose watched, feeling tears she barely tried to hold back. Victor noticed and offered her tea. She accepted and offered him a toast silently, hands raised slightly. Rose closed her journal entry that night. Courage began with a note and a safe. But redemption ended with seedlings, butterflies, a boy's hero, and a garden of shared trust blossoming far beyond any boundary. The garden glowed in the dark. In that hush, she knew their work had only just begun, but already justice had grown wings. The August afternoon brightness softened as Rose Monroe stood in front of her safe for the 12th and final time. The lock clicked closed around a small folder. Inside it lay Ethan's drawing of Victor labeled, "My Hero," a yellowed note with neat handwriting. Safe was open, didn't touch a thing. VT. Rose pressed her palm to the cool metal, breathing deeply. Today, they would change the moment into memory. Ethan skipped into the study holding his final drawing, this one. A sprawling garden under clouds, butterflies, and people planting together. At the top, in bold letters, "Community Garden of Justice." Rose smiled, wiping a tear. "Thank you, sweetheart." Victor entered with tools in hand, pausing to share the drawing. Ethan ran to place it inside the safe. "I want to keep it here, Mom." Rose nodded. Inside, it would be safe still, honored. As the sun lowered, guests gathered for the closing ceremony at the garden pavilion. Neighbors, interns, families, board members, even Officer Blake stood scattered under lanterns. Rose welcomed everyone, then called Victor forward. "Tonight I offer you more than thanks," she said. "I'm entrusting you with the keys not because I started the story, but because you helped write its final chapter." She handed him a new key, symbolic but real. Victor accepted it quietly and turned to the crowd. "This garden started with a mistake," he began. "It was an accident of prejudice, but it grew into truth, stewardship, and relationships. Today, I hand this key back, not to close a door, but to open it for more people, more learning, and justice that lives. Applause rose around him, sincere. Rose present them the framed photograph of Ethan's original drawing, mounted with the safe's key taped behind. This artwork and the key symbolize that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it humbles a wealthy woman, honors a quiet man, and opens doors that were once closed by fear. A hush followed, then rain of cheers. As guests wandered between flower beds and the rain garden humming with activity, Carol Jensen approached Victor holding a honeycomb-patterned scarf she had woven. "I made this for you," she said, voice small. As thanks and apology, Victor accepted with a soft nod. "Thank you." Nearby, Ethan placed small potted milkweed plants at Carol's feet. The gesture spoke peace. As dusk turned to night, Rose gathered Victor and Ethan by the treehouse. Lanterns flickered bright in the branches above. Violet twilight pressed the garden silhouette into shadow and light. Rose placed a small keyring in Victor's hand, the key to her house. "Not because I trust you now, but because I should have long ago," she whispered. Victor looked at the key, then at Rose, then at Ethan. "I'll protect more than your garden," he said. "I'll protect his world." In doubt, they sat together on the porch swing, surrounded by summer's final blooms. Ethan on Victor's lap, Rose beside them. For the first time in weeks, no doubt hovered between them. Their breaths synced with night's hush. As the crowd drifted away, Victoria remained under soft lamplight, tracing patterns on a notebook of future plans, scholarship partnerships, pollinator corridors, youth internships. Rose looked on, hands folded in her lap, feeling a relief deeper than triumph, humility, justice, community. Later, she returned to the study and placed both drawings, the key, and Victor's note inside the safe again, in memory. Then she retrieved her journal. She wrote, "The vault once held suspicion. Now it holds sketches, gratitude, and a powerful reminder. Justice doesn't need to shout with community and care. It grows quietly, roots deep, and wings strong." She closed it, locked the safe for the last time. Outside, the garden still glowed. Crickets sang. Fireflies dotted the beds like stars brought low. Rose stepped into the yard and inhaled deeply. Tomorrow, she would start planning next year's spring planting. But tonight, she let herself rest in the truth they'd built together. Victor stood beside her. Ethan drifted to sleep inside under a nightlight, shaped like a butterfly. Rose rested her hand on Victor's arm. "We're not finished, but we've done enough to prove something real." He nodded in the dark, gentle night. "That's all a garden, or justice, ever needs." And at home, within the locked vault, safety and trust finally lived together, a girl's drawing, a man's integrity, and a promise that justice, once tested, can bloom forever. This story reminds us that justice is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it takes root quietly, through everyday actions, simple truths, and moments of humility. It teaches us that trust, once broken by prejudice, can be rebuilt with patience and respect. True integrity does not demand applause. It reveals itself in silence, in restraint, and in the courage to walk away from what is easy to take. Ultimately, healing begins when we choose to believe in one another again.